Episode of Curated Intelligence. I'm your host, Steve Reagan. Joining me is InfoSec Palm. We're going to talk about EDR and vendors today, so sit back and relax and hang out with us for a little while. So, InfoSec Palm on Twitter, also known as Kurt. How are you, buddy? Happy Friday to you.
Doing good, Steve. Thanks. How you doing? I'm just, taking a lunch break, having a quick chat on the Curated Intel Discord, and just figured we could have a quick rundown on some things that might help a few folks out and have some better understanding of some things that, me and you or anybody else that might join in to this conversation, because you never know, somebody might happen to hop in with some insights or anything. Might be a good insight for them to take back to not just their enterprise, but just their learning in general. If this applies to open source tools, enterprises, and there's obviously much that can be said about EDRs and vendors, and more talking about the need of the layer of different layers of defenses and the ability to have granular logging. It's troubling sometimes when you go into an investigation as an analyst or trying to do some sort of incident handling, and the best that you got is your EDR tool. And these EDR vendors, they do a decent job. They'll knock out a lot of the various tactics and techniques that you'll see out there, and they will, block a lot of the automated attack chains through various means, but sometimes through various living off the land techniques and the ability to use administrative tools to otherwise meet adversarial goals, it's not enough. You need, and EDR vendors make it prohibitively tough to actually go and threat hunt on our systems. So it's just something that I would definitely like to kind of discern at an industry level for newer analysts or people that might not understand, or maybe they're not involved in cyber threat security or cybersecurity or InfoSec or maybe they're on the IT side of things and they're trying to understand better why they need Sysmon or they need more granular logging on their Linux systems or on their, within the cloud or within their identity management systems. There's definitely a need for, there is obviously the caveat of you can have too much logging. That's of course a possibility, because you don't want too much noise. You want valuable, you want valuable logs and everything. But at the end of the day, if you're not having the visibility that you need to retroactively do an investigation, it's, eventually you will find yourself, up a pretty shitty creek.
All right. So that serves as a really good intro to this for those that are new. Curated Intelligence is a Discord for CTI analysts, cynics like Kurt and myself, and a little bit of everything. And so don't be surprised during this recording if you do hear people pop in and out. Right now we are in the Discord live in the voice chat, just kind of hanging out. And so I suppose, sticking with the EDR theme, go ahead and explain to those who are new to this field what EDR is and why it is valuable, what you expect out of it.
Right. So there's definitely a lot of immense value that comes from an EDR tool because it's endpoint detection and response, but it doesn't allow network visibility or there are some network callouts that you can see, but in terms of a system to system connection that otherwise wouldn't be on the endpoint, you might otherwise not see that, whereas you would see that in firewall logging or there is immense value in EDR tools at large because they do block, for instance, a living off the land tactic that I like to use in some of my handwritten tools is certutil-d, which will download a file from a URL essentially. Outright block that, or EDRs will outright block that, and it's it's very powerful to outright block. Like if I'm an attacker and I'm not hands on keyboard, but I'm going through a script of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it makes sense to, on part 3, be able to block the attack, but on part 1 and 2, if it's rather low level things that don't obviously line up with attackers, they might not even detect on it. But once those 1, 2, 3 steps line up, and that step 3 is the cert util -d, it's going to detect that, block it outright, and then it's going to alert and send you a detection that there's likely an attacker on the box. So that's that response piece. And then it allows you to, log into the box. Every EDR system essentially allows you to log into the box and otherwise, mitigate things. They can pull down files, throw scripts at it, do different things. It's obviously open source means that allow you to pull files as well once you're in the know. But the bad part about EDRs, and they do have immense value in being able to just straight out thwart automated attack chains, and through a lot of hands-on keyboard level tactics as well. But in a different way that you could use cert util in encoding and decoding, you could just simply encode a file, turn it into text, throw it at a paste bin type of site through automated means. And EDRs really aren't going to detect on any of that, right? I mean, they're going to, they're going to essentially get to a certain point and not know whether this is good or bad. If you tell it, hey, encode this into certificate level data and then send it in by using the file, by copying, essentially using Control C, Control V type of commands, copy and paste, or just clip, clip.exe or something like that to move the file through a browser, or whatever it might be, just really really low level things, your EDR really might not trigger on that, right? Like, it's such low level things that it but as an attacker, that's great. You know what I'm saying? On the other end of things, I'm receiving that text data, that cert util encoded data, and I can decode it on my end and recreate the files or the exfiltrated data. And that all flies under the radar of quite a lot of EDR systems. So while they're great tools, they're not the end all be all. And there's, if say where that were to happen within or outside of the data retention period of your EDR, I mean, you would be, it's pretty tough, because it makes it prohibitively expensive to typically ingest all the raw data from an EDR solution, because they genuinely do get in a lot of data, but most of the time the retention periods for them are quite short, because unless you're willing to pay an arm and a leg, which is it's a pretty rife issue within the industry at large with most vendors, is that they're willing to sell you the boat, but the oars and the paddles, right? They're going to cost, the boat's $1 million, and you're like, oh man, I get a boat for $1 million. That's great. But you don't realize that a boat without a motor, which is an extra $10 million, or paddles, which are an extra $7 million each, it's kind of a useless tool, right? Like a boat and water, without either one of those things, you're just kind of sitting around wondering what to do with it. It's the same thing, right? It's many vendors are willing to sell you that boat, but unless you're willing to spend the extras to also get the great motor, a boat typically comes with a motor, unless it's a rowboat, then typically will come with oars, or oars are cheap enough where it's not an expense. But to make the tool extremely useful in an investigative manner, like, costs 10 times more than what the quote was originally, it starts to get kind of, you start to really shine a light on some of the problems that these vendors like to, I don't think they see it as a problem, but the more that us in the industry see these kind of things, it's pretty obvious that what they're doing, it's like they'll get you in bed for $1 million, but then by the time that you're hooked into their systems and they're in your systems and everybody's happy, but you're just now realizing, like, oh, but we need these other 4 or 5 things, but now we're going to really jack up the price. But without this, it's really not that valuable. I've personally ran into that quite a few times with many different vendors and tools.
I think one other thing that goes along with what you just said is the fact that a lot of vendors, and you're going out of your way to be nice and be polite and somewhat professional. I have no such problems. The thing that I don't like when I hear about EDR and discuss it with people is the fact that a lot of vendors just flat out oversell their shit, and they try to make it seem like it is a silver bullet or it's an end all be all. And they love to throw the scary stats at you from like the DBIR and other reports and talk to you about, like how this tool is going to help you get to zero quicker and you're going to be able to respond faster and everything like that. And they forget like some of the basic elements that goes into properly using an EDR. For example, relationships inside and outside of the security and IT departments. Like, for example, when you're getting information from all departments, you're going to get a better understanding of what normal looks like across your environment. And that will help you identify malicious activity with higher fidelity, I guess would be a good term for it there. And that's fine. But the problem is, if you're not getting that information from everywhere, then you're going to run into problems off the jump with actually seeing, what's coming in and what's not, because that little bit of visibility an EDR gives you. And like you said, an EDR does not give you complete visibility across your network, but it does give you some. But if you're not using it, you're missing out already. And so for that, it's one of those things to where, like, off the jump, people are already behind the eight ball on this, and they start to fall behind when an incident happens, because then you run into retention problems, you run into scale problems, because the longer you use an EDR, the more ingrained it gets into your system, the more costly it would be to replace it with something else or augment it, or like you were saying, add new services and features. That stuff comes at a price. It's almost a la carte, depending on what vendor you're dealing with. And then go ahead.
Go ahead. Right. And yeah, I mean, no, I 100% agree. The overselling is just a huge problem, especially because a lot of people just genuinely don't know. Like, a lot of people aren't in the weeds and able to test an EDR and be like, look, I got this piece of intelligence. It had these TTPs, the tactics that an adversary would actually use in an environment and everything, and then test it up against, the EDRs or the different tools to see what the detections, what does it log, what doesn't it log, what does it block, what doesn't it block in our specific configuration, during those particular adversarial emulation type of activities and everything. It's just, most people don't have the time. If you're a director and you have 2 reports and there's no, there is no intelligence team. You have 2 IT guys that do all the re-images for you. Those kind of, that kind of scenario and everything. It's so easy for a company to come and upsell you and oversell you and be like, look, here's this tool. You need this, you need that, you need our help. You need, and then they make it extremely tough. Like, most EDRs don't make it very easy to actually do threat hunting, because they want you to use their services and their MSSP and their things. Like, they want you to be so ingrained with them that you can't leave them. And that's just not, I just really feel like that's a pretty scummy way of doing things. Really, it's just not, it's not right to oversell to people that just genuinely don't know, because then you're putting companies more at risk, right? You can't tell them that we're going to stop every attacker because we know all the things and we have the best intelligence and the best tools and we get the best this and that. Because once that actually isn't the case and isn't a fact, the people that you oversold to are going to have a false sense of security. They're going to think that they're able to do these. There are a lot of people just honestly, they'll easy bake oven it, right? They'll just set and forget it, or whatever that was whatever the slogan that whatever the slogan that was for, that's what they'll that's what they'll think it is, really. Though, I've worked with a lot of companies that are like, well, we got this EDR, we're good, and they don't even think they need antivirus anymore. They don't need further logging. They don't really need to worry about the phishing, because they're like, well, if they're compromised, the EDR will pick it up. It's fine. And they just genuinely try to almost disregard security as a whole at a certain point. Like, it's, I don't want to say a lot of people feel that way, because I'm sure most people don't, but it is something that I've personally encountered. Is once you get something in there, then and they've oversold their capabilities to the point of you think you have that silver bullet. You genuinely believe that. It's just probably the worst, really the worst mentality that you can have. And not everybody, but at the same time, not everybody has the resources to do in-depth threat hunting. And what's the point of detailed sysmon logs and detailed cloud logging and getting Azure Sentinel set up to blah blah blah, because that's the way that you all are moving to the cloud and everybody's going to the cloud, and what does that mean? And like everybody's willing, but then the thing is on the vendor side, everybody's willing to sell you a product, like, and a lot of times you really probably could have just wrote a couple scripts and replaced what they did entirely. Like, now I'm kind of going into I guess that more of that intelligence space. There's so many vendors where it's like they're willing to sell you a new module or a new product, and we're always thankful for it, because I don't want to begrudge anybody for their attempts at trying to do what their customers are asking, because that's just, that's what they should do. But at the end of the day, like, if I could have wrote 100 lines of Python and plopped it into some kind of web host and just had it running as some sort of task and cost me $1 a month, I don't know if I should be charged 10 or 20 grand extra on top of whatever I'm already paying you. And then you're going to charge me an extra 20 grand for something that would cost me $1 a month to write myself. Like, I don't.
Oh, it gets better, homie. What happens when they upcharge you for that, and then you realize the module they had just upcharged you for is a 100-line Python script? Like,
exactly. Well, and then the thing is you get into a contract with it for 2 or 3 years, and because that's just the way that they've sold it to you, and that's the way that your company decided to go with it. It's just, and it's really tough at that analyst level. Like, it makes you feel, or even at the manager or the leadership level, right? Like, I mean, it would probably make you feel rather bad to know that you're paying for something that your team very likely could have cooked up themselves. So, and just knowing that, and yeah, sometimes it is a little easier. You take the maintenance load off of your team. There is an advantage to it, right? Like, like I said, if you're that shop of one director, one manager, two analysts, and none of you all know how to write Python, none of you all know how to do this or that, maybe it does make sense. If you're getting value out of the service that they're providing and you don't have the means, and sure, I guess, that service is out there for somebody, but so many things are like that it's just, or just a RESTful API. Like, I mean, anybody that's kind of dabbling in code could eventually find their way to be able, stumble their way into being able to figure out how to write that sort of logic and querying capability and stuff. So it just seems weird that that companies would be willing to pay so much more. It'd be different if it only costs like $200, $500, $1,000, a month or something, whatever, like, or some measly amount of money, but it's, or just rolled up into what you're already paying for them. Like, but they're always upselling. They're always wanting to push the envelope on how much money they can squeeze out of you, and it's getting no better. Like, everybody thinks we're going to save money with the cloud. Like, all this a la carte, pay as you go, whatever nonsense. Like, it just makes people want to add less logging, do less things, and cut down on as much cost as possible, because every resource cycle you use in these new cloud environments and these new things, it's going to incur a cost. Like, instead of you having an on-prem SIM, now the SIM's going to charge you for literally everything they can. They're going to nickel and dime you into, I don't know. And how does the money shake out? Maybe it all just evens out in the end. But I just don't like that feeling personally. Like, I personally don't like the way that a lot of the as a service kind of things are going. It just seems kind of troubling personally.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of quick items to follow up on what you were saying. And again, this is drilled down to those of you who are new to this topic. Okay. Another thing to consider on top of like the relationship building and things like this is also standardize how you tune your EDR. Tuning is critical. You have to tune it. So look at the alerts that are firing and what they're firing on. and work it out with your team. Are they what you want? Is this a valid alert that just got fired off? Is this something you wanted to hit on? If it's not, you need to address that. And the thing is, with EDR, tuning is a constant thing. You can't just tune it once and then forget about it. You have to constantly work at that. And
exactly.
So,
In the larger environments, you run into things where it's just wild. Like you'll wake up one morning and there's just 8,000 alerts from something that happened overnight that wasn't there the next, the day before or in the day after. It's not going to happen again. It's just, but now you have a gigantic mess to clean up, and it's just, it is wild, man. How you just, you definitely hit the nail on the head. That it's, tuning is definitely an ongoing, just ever present thing, and if you let it get away from you, it becomes pretty daunting pretty quick.
So we got a question in chat that I want to answer because it's a good question. Is having EDR in a representative set of sample machines for IR and detection purposes a decent idea or no? It is a very decent idea. In fact, it's always smart. And depending on the size of the shop you're in, I would recommend starting with like maybe 10% of your systems, high traffic systems, and then expanding out to that. And so,
at first, I feel like there is definitely it depends how big's your environment. Like if you have 100 systems, dude, just put the agents on the box. Like you're talking about nothing. Like that's a short afternoon for somebody that's experienced and knows what they're doing. So I don't know if, but if you have 200,000 systems and you're talking about millions and billions of dollars of revenue on the line, all right, now you got to be a little bit more careful, right? Like you probably do want to slow bake, maybe you just start out with the EDR agents on your InfoSec teams boxes just to make sure nothing wild and crazy is going to happen, and then like maybe, a little tiny shorter bit down the line, you start to pump up the, just the number that you have, but eventually you do want that 100% across the board agent deployment, right? Because it doesn't, a lot of times, especially in organizations that are more flat, they don't have that network segmentation. They don't work from a principle of least privilege type of infrastructure. It's just, you really have to you really want to hedge your bets on like, I need to put this everywhere. And that's because a lot of times it's not, it's about finding that initial access and the people that are, sitting on the box and waiting for their opportune time to strike. It's once they've done enough reconnaissance, once they've laterally moved to the right environment or right box or gotten the right set of credentials through somebody doing something stupid, you really want to hedge your bet on having visibility into all of those boxes, especially if EDR is all you got. I mean, man, you really, really want to have 100% coverage, in my opinion. But that's where I start to bleed into the defensive layer topic. We definitely want to push you always want to push forward in security. Like it's really hard to go backwards. Like anytime you're allowed, IT's always going to try to tell you that whatever you're doing is messing up the systems or the boxes. It's inevitable, right? That's just, they're always going to tell you that whatever you're saying is, whatever you're saying it's going to cripple what they're doing. And it's like, well, is it, you're talking about 2% of the system's CPU. Like if that really completely crushes what you're doing, like you're utilizing too many resources on the system already anyway. So, I definitely think that we do need to, you want to keep them on the most impactful systems at first, but it's hard though. Like what's impactful? Like when you have 200,000 systems or something like that, like what's impactful? These 5,000, these 5,000, these 10,000, who are you going to ask? I mean,
you break them out on usage, dude. What you do is you start off by putting the EDR out on, let's say, sales and marketing. They get the most traffic. So they're also the most visible in the company. So you would put it out to them. Actually, when I've done EDR in the past, what we did was we did start in IT. We started with IT and security, and then from there we branched out to sales, and then from there we branched out to remote sales because we had two different distinctions. We had sales internally, and then we had the traveling sales reps who had their stuff outwards. So we split that up, and then we branched out over into marketing, and then PR, and then finally the last stage was the executive suite, and we put it on all them, and that was 100%. And so, like earlier when I was saying you would start off by putting it on your high traffic, that's where I was going with it. And of course, we got a couple of follow-up questions to that, which actually makes sense. If you're doing representative samples, do you want to put some on different boxes with different vendors? Yes, if you can. But here's the trick. You may have a lot of vendors in your environment, and you may want to, leverage that to see if you can get coverage gaps and detection gaps identified and, of course, remediated either through tuning or, increasing options for a given vendor or whatnot. But that's the rub. That's your catch 22 there, is the fact that you may not have the ability to expand with certain vendors. You may not have a wide selection of vendors. I know a lot of single vendor shops. I know a lot of shops that have multiple vendors across the board. It really depends on your environment. So while it's a good idea to do that, it's one of those things to where you're going to have to do a lot of self-assessment. You're going to have to do a lot of self-care to look at your environment and try to go with what's best. And I see you in the chat, Michael. Type in more questions. Please keep them coming, because that was a very good question to ask. Now, Cypher is asking, is it better for SMB orgs to administrate their own EDR with an internal SOC or to outsource it to an MSSP SOC? Now, here's the rub on that one. You're assuming that an internal org has a SOC. I know a lot of SMBs who simply do not have that luxury. What they have is a guy named Larry who sits in a cube, and Larry does some security stuff and some engineering stuff. And then you got Mike who answers all the help desk tickets. And then occasionally they outsource and bring in a couple of temp workers when, they're doing new projects or they're imaging a whole bunch of servers or something like that. They don't have a SOC, in which case an MSSP might make sense to them. But really, does it? This is a question you're going to have to look. And again, this goes with the self-care. Are you big enough to support this internally with like a dedicated staff, which you would then call your SOC? Or is this something you should outsource? Where's the cost benefit there? Keep in mind, the cost benefit doesn't just include the hiring of people to administer this and manage it, like your SOC internally, or the fees to externally manage it. You've also got to look at the licensing fees that are involved. You're going to have to look at all of your expansion fees that are going to come with new clients. Because again, if you put this stuff on your system and it suddenly starts draining resources, which is a complaint you hear all the time, that's an indication your resources need upgraded. So that's a cost. There's going to be a fee associated with that. Be it you got to pay for new RAM for all your computers, you got to pay for new computers, whatever it is, you're still going to have to upgrade. And so there's stuff to take in mind. And again, it's going to come down to the individual business. Now, me personally, what would I do? I would say if you don't have the ability to manage it yourself, then you're better off looking at MSSPs and going to somebody who can, because you need this stuff tuned and you need it managed proper before it'll work for you. This is not something you just slap onto a system and magically the security gods shine upon you from the Pantheon and you're protected or you can respond to things. That's just not how this works. So the follow-up question you had was, do MSSPs struggle to tailor detection policy to client organizations, especially when they have multiple clients? Yes, absolutely. If they use a flat type of configuration across all their clients. That means they have to manually go through and tune each and every one of those per client, which is something a good MSSP should be doing for you anyway. It should never be one size fits all, because that, A, is not how security works, and B, that's not how business works. My basic widget shop may be in the same vertical market as Kurt's widget shop, but we operate two different streams here. We're in the same industry, but we're not the same company. So his configurations and needs are going to be far different than mine. There may be one or two things that overlap, but we're never going to be on that same wavelength. So yeah, they do struggle, and it's something that they shouldn't struggle with, honestly, but they do. And that answers your third question there. What What conditions need to be satisfied? How much should detection policies reflect actively changing TTPs? So you don't want to dump existing TTPs because a threat actor will sometimes revert backwards, but you also want to leave yourself enough growth and have the kind of visibility to address changing TTPs. Remember, if a criminal hits a brick wall, but they notice that all they have to do is turn right, they're going to turn right eventually and go around that brick wall. So you have to be able to make sure your detection policies are updated. But that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Tuning is a constant process. Tuning is something you have to do all the time. And that includes, looking for new TTPs and adjusting policies accordingly. What do we got here? FOSS for endpoint protection. I don't believe in FOSS. I think no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to get burned alive for that one. What do you think, Kurt? What's FOSS for endpoint protection? What do you recommend?
So I can't remember some of the names off the top of my head. They escape me, and honestly, they probably shift over time. But I have noticed that none of them are scalable. Like, that's the one main thing that I've personally noticed about a lot of the EDRs and free AVs and free this, free that. Like, at the enterprise level, like, yeah, they might, like, a free AV works for your grandma, and Defender. I mean, my God, Defender is, talk about a tool that is really gone from literally a joke within the industry to being quite the formidable opponent for adversaries. I mean, if you're not using Defender on your home PC, then I don't know what you're doing.
Can you do that? Wait a minute. I thought Defender was like permanently turned on. Like, you can't even screw with it anymore. I thought Microsoft did away with the ability for home users to mess with Defender. I thought it was just there now. Like, no
I just always have it on. I haven't tried to turn it off in forever because it just works in the background so well that I just don't even. I've never needed to try anymore. So that's probably. I mean, that's great if they have. I haven't read that change personally, but yeah, they probably have. That makes sense. I'm sure there's some way, like if you want to registry hack it and set up some environment variable to whatever and okay, sure.
But at that point, if you're smart enough to change all that on your home computer, well, you're smart enough to avoid a lot of the common attacks that Defender blocks. So, ta-da, you're good.
Yeah, exactly. But back to FOSS, free and open source. Sorry, yeah, that happens sometimes. I get, if anybody knows me, I get pretty ranty and rambly. But yeah, but what I've seen them used for a lot is like CTFs and stuff. So SANS and some other organizations, like when they'll put together I think like Raptor is that, I feel like that's a name that I don't know. I can't remember what it is, but there's some EDR tool that's within the Security Onion, which is just like a free suite of open source tools that, if you look up the Security Onion, you're going to get a plethora of, you're going to get a plethora of options and opportunities that you otherwise might not have. So it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of opportunity there, but at an enterprise level, without the support, like, you might be at a small, tiny company, maybe, but I mean, an EDR is something that could really bring down some serious systems and cause a lot of problems and headaches. So you really like to have a vendor. That is the one good thing, is that when shit hits the fan, having a vendor to lean on and having a good relationship with them and then providing good customer support, that is really what makes a good vendor versus a bad vendor, honestly, is that them either responding to your feedback about how their product sucks and how they're going to change it and make it better, or their customer support and the ability to, like, oh my God, your stuff is making our shit hit the fan. What are you going to do about it? And then if they can fix it pretty fast, I mean, really, that's, that, I'm not going to lie, that does make or break whether a big company will stick with you or not.
No, I'd like to add to that, actually, on the point about using FOSS products in a corporate environment. I think that a lot of organizations lean towards wanting what you've described, Kurt, and I think it involves having some type of liability that they can put onto the actual vendor providing the EDR product. And so in that decision, I think that a lot of organizations wouldn't even consider open source software really for almost anything, let alone EDR. They would typically much rather pay for it unless they're like a very small shop. Being able to lean in on that customer support goes a really long way. Now, I think it is worth mentioning that not all EDR products have good customer support from their organizations that build them. This typically isn't apparent until you actually buy the product, but I think that that's a really good point about having that reliability and that customer support.
So for those of you still with us, you just heard Cypher, who joined the conversation. And again, Cypher is the reason most of us are here in Curated Intelligence. It's his server we hang out on and troll each other with. And that's actually a really good point about FOSS. Over the years, I have found a lot of organizations, and I know we started on EDR, but we're looking at FOSS in general right now. I have had a hard time convincing organizations that for their needs, FOSS is actually the way to go because it scales better and it's easier to manage. And it's really hard for a number of reasons, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that it scares them in many ways for a number of different reasons. Some are regulatory reasons. Some are, you don't want to fall into the trap of Derek the Graybeard knows how to manage all of our FOSS stuff. And if Derek leaves, none of us know what to do with it. Like that's a true fear for a lot of organizations. And we were just joined by Arthur. Hello, Arthur. How are you? Welcome to the channel. I don't know if
Hi, thank you.
There you are. I didn't know if you were able to speak yet.
Yeah, I could not resist joining.
So you were the one who asked the question about FOSS or asked a follow-up question about the FOSS. So I'm curious, what are your takes on that? So we were just discussing that, there are some quality FOSS alternatives out there. And Cypher had chimed in that most organizations will never use that, and I agree. But what is your take on it?
Is this focused on EDR solutions or it's more than
EDR,
that?
FOSS in general? We've opened up the floor, sorta. So I'm just curious your take on it, what you're thinking.
Honestly, it depends because it can be quite time-consuming to maintain and support. So if there's a problem and you're using a FOSS alternative, you might not be able to have the time to be in the back troubleshooting because it crashed for some reason. So then again, I support what Trev said. Or Cypher.
For anybody listening, my name's actually Trevor, but my alias is Cypher. Thank you, Arthur.
Yeah, I apologize for that. Sorry.
Docs.
But yes.
Well, building off of Arthur's point here and the difficulties of maintaining a FOSS solution, I think that it's worth looking at the cost of purchasing a commercial product versus the cost of employing somebody to administrate and maintain and build this solution as well, because it's not just a matter of building out this open source solution and implementing it in your organization. May that be endpoint detection and response EDR or something else. But you do need to look at the actual headcount cost of administrating it. But on top of that, depending on the organization, there's additional steps to ensure that you have secure architecture that's compliant with policies also. I think that a common challenge that many organizations would face would be to, once it's built out and administrated, also making sure that it's compliant with perhaps CIS security compliance standards. And this will be required for most respectable organizations. So, and not only that, but you'll have to, just speaking from experience and working with our own teams who've done wonderful jobs of implementing open source solutions, it's definitely been an uphill battle, and it has 100% required code reviews, ensuring the secure architecture, making sure that the architecture that you're administrating lines up with internal corporate policies, and of course that, like I said, CIS security compliance. All of these things, this doesn't even mention the integrations for it. What if you need an integration built for something? In a commercial situation, you should be able to lean on your vendor and ask them to build an integration in the background for you while you focus on the work that matters in your day-to-day function. Whereas if you're using an open source solution, well, what are you left with? You likely have to build a solution yourself if the open source developers are not willing to build it on the timeline in which you need. So you might find yourself having to fork off the solution, build new integrations that you otherwise wouldn't have to do with a commercial solution. And these are all types of considerations that I think have to go into using a open source solution for anything in a corporation that would be respectable. Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right. So, Kurt, we're quickly approaching time. And before we ended this discussion, I wanted to ask you one final question. If you were to give an organization advice about EDR solutions, let's say they have nothing and they're looking to get involved and they want to start something up, what's your first advice to them for, just getting things kicked off? What should they be considering? Or what questions should they be asking their vendor?
So they definitely should be considering, like, what goals are they trying to accomplish, right? Are they trying to stop every single attacker that they can? Or are they trying, overall, what are they trying to accomplish by putting an EDR solution in? Are they trying to stop bad guys from doing bad things? Are they trying to stop administrative bloopers and blunders as well? Like, how deep in the, you can get pretty, some of the configs that you can throw at EDRs can get pretty wild, but they're also very heavy-handed. So that's probably something that they need to consider. Is they need to go through the process of who are they, who fits the bang for the buck scenario for them. Like, you got to do your whole, Gartner quadrant scenario, right? You got to well, here's this number one, here's number two, here's number three, here's number five, and then eventually you get to the point where you're like, well, 2 and 4 are a no-go because they cost way too much. You start to iron out cost versus capability versus, a lot of, and also it's like growth, you know what I mean? Like if there's a company that's been around for 20 years and they don't have great reviews, some vendors, you don't really want, I don't know why you would hop in bed with them, right? So you got to look at the historical value and then just with the future, there's the future outlook. Like there's, everything from pretty crappy people that are willing to sell you a tool that won't help you very much to, I would say some very, very good tools that will, help you quite a lot. So they definitely need to go through and just consider their procurement processes in general. Like why, just like I said, the goal of why do we want this to begin with? And then see where it goes from there, and then find the one that makes the best bang for your buck. But they all do kind of do the same. I don't want to say they do the same things, but if I had to guess, I would say the things that match up between them, whether the things that they will detect and outright block versus the things that they outright miss, would match up a lot more than any of the vendors would be willing to. Probably any of them would be willing to admit, and I believe that's why a lot of them deal with a lot of secret sauce, and that's something that a lot of vendors deal with, but EDR vendors specifically try to act like they're so next level. And so I guess if there's one final takeaway about EDRs and getting in bed with them and an EDR vendor or just vendors in general is be ready for them to not tell you why. How are they detecting these things? That's their proprietary sauce. That's their secret sauce. They won't tell you why they're able to detect this or what they're going to detect on or how they're going to do this. You just got to trust them. And it's that's very, very hard for people, people that live by trust but verify. And then you're putting your money and your security and your enterprise ultimately in the hands of somebody else that isn't letting you verify. That's tough. That's not, just from a mentality standpoint, that really doesn't, it doesn't sit well with me. And honestly, I don't know why it would sit well with anybody. So If there was one thing that, like, if there was ever a vendor that came out and was like, the one thing that was known about them is that they're forthcoming about how they do things. I don't care if what they do is exactly parallel to what somebody else does because of them giving away that quote unquote secret sauce. I would choose them almost every time because I'm going to know exactly probably what's going on under the covers, which is what I need as an analyst. Like from like, and that's why you need further visibility and more like Sysmon and those kind of things.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. All righty. This has been Curated Intelligence. I'm your host, Steve Reagan. Joining me today, Cypher, Kurt, Arthur, butchering the names. Hopefully this was entertaining and a little bit informative. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at Curated Intelligence. You can find us on Twitter. And of course, if you're so inclined, ask for an invite. Come hang out on Discord. We'll see you soon.